The History of the Italian Language, Part 2, From Latin to Early Italian. In the first video, we learnt that Italian is one of the many Romance languages descended from Latin. In this video, we will see how Latin became Italian and look at the earliest examples of the Italian language. So what is the earliest example of the Italian language? The traditional date for the founding of Rome is April 21st, 753 BC. And the earliest example of written Latin is an inscription on a brooch from the 7th century BC found near Rome. It says, Manius made me for numerius. This is a very archaic form of the language and is called Old Latin. At this time, it was only the language of the area around Rome, called Latium, so we can't really call this the Italian language yet. The most famous Latin authors, such as Cicero and Caesar, come from the Classical Latin period, from 75 BC to the 3rd century AD. This type of Latin became the written standard and the form that later writers tried to emulate. As the Roman Empire increased in size, the Latin language was spread across most of Europe as the language of government, commerce, and religion. Everyone wrote in the same way, but the way people spoke started to change in the various parts of the empire. We know a lot about how the Romans pronounced Latin because they liked writing about the grammar and pronunciation of their language. Here are some Latin words pronounced as Cicero probably pronounced them in the classical period, and then how later Romans might have said them. Not all these changes happened everywhere. Sardinian is a very conservative language, and the same words are pronounced much more like the Latin versions than the modern Italian ones are.
Caelum, caelu, cielo, cielo,
cielo, gelu,
fidem, fide, fede,
fede, fide,
gula, gola,
gola, gula,
gypsum, gypsu, gissu, gesso, gesso,
gesso, gisu,
phantasma, fantasma,
fantasma, fantasima.
Over time, various sounds changed, and at the end of the classical period, in about the 3rd century AD, the words would have been pronounced quite differently in the various Roman provinces. The pronunciation continued to change throughout the following centuries, but the words were still written in the same way, and people still thought of themselves as speaking Latin. It was only in the 8th or 9th centuries that people started to see classical Latin as a separate language, not just a more formal version of what they spoke. Here is a famous quote in Latin that Julius Caesar said when he won the Battle of Zela in 47 BC. The classical pronunciation is how it is believed Caesar himself would have pronounced the phrase,
veni, vidi, vici.
Romans from later times would have pronounced it slightly differently.
Veni, vidi, vici. Veni, vidi, vici.
Gradually, the pronunciation changed, coming nearer and nearer to modern Italian.
Venni, vidi, vinci.
It wasn't just the pronunciation that changed, the language itself changed too. New ways to say things appeared and words acquired new meanings. Latin words had endings that told you who was doing what to whom, and it didn't matter what order the words were in, the endings always made the meaning clear. But as the pronunciation changed, and people tended not to pronounce final consonants, the word order became important to understand what people meant. Latin had a complex system of endings to show how words related to each other. For example, the word mule as the subject of the sentence, the mule sees the forest. The word mule as the object of the sentence, the man sees the mule. To show possession, the mule's apple, or the apple of the mule. To the mule, by mule or on the mule, and even when addressing a mule. People tended to simplify things over time, and because this form, the accusative, was often used for sentences such as I have a mule, or she saw a mule, he heard the mule, etc., people started to use this form all the time instead of the others. As the ending became pronounced o, these three forms became indistinguishable. As a result, prepositions were used to make things clear. Latin did not have a definite or indefinite article, the or a. So to say the monk sees a mule, you just said monk sees mule. But gradually, people started to use words such as ille, which meant that, and unus, that meant one. Without the final consonants, and with the change in pronunciation of the short vowel sounds, the sentence is starting to look more like modern Italian.
Il monaco vede un mulo.
Words changed too. These classical Latin words were replaced by more informal terms. The informal colloquial style of Latin is called Vulgar Latin. That doesn't mean that it is rude, like our modern word vulgar. It means how the people spoke. Vulgar Latin developed and evolved over time, while the written classical Latin stayed more or less unchanged. The Veronese riddle is considered by some to be the earliest example of an Italian Romance language, but others consider it to be late Vulgar Latin. It dates from the 8th or 9th century and was scribbled on the side of a page of parchment. Here is what it would be in classical Latin, with the differences highlighted in red. And here is the modern Italian. It is thought to come from the area of Verona, as the words parar and versoro for driving and plough are still used in the dialects of the Veneto region today. And the answer to the riddle? The oxen are the scribe's fingers, the white meadows are the pages of a book, the white plough is the quill pen, and the black seed is the ink. The first example of what is definitely early Italian, and no longer a type of Vulgar Latin, is a group of official documents from the 10th century regarding land disputes between Benedictine monasteries and a local landowner. These documents are called the Placiti Casinesi. Latin was the official written language in Italy in the Middle Ages, but in court cases it was important to write down exactly what people said, and when people had to swear an oath, it had to be written in the local language, so normal people who had not received an education in Latin knew exactly what they were swearing. Here it is in modern Italian and an English translation.
So che quelle terre, per quei confini, che qui sono contenuti, per 30 anni le possedette l'abbazia di San Benedetto.
Thank you for watching the History of the Italian Language Part 2. In the third and final video, we will look at all the dialects spoken in Italy that are descended from Latin, and how one, the dialect of Tuscany, became the standard for modern Italian.